Huge canceled AEW plans have been revealed. Plus, we're going to talk about Daniel Garcia possibly leaving AEW for WWE and so much more. It's coming up right here on The Ango Show. Yes. All right, guys, so I want to kick things off by letting you know that we have some updated merch on the channel, and we do got a discount code. Use the code SUMMER24 for 15% off, available now on www.ango.live. But with that being said, let's just jump right into it. Bryan Danielson, we've already talked about his contract expiring August 1st, but now what's really interesting is that according to the USPTO, which is the trademark office, Bryan Danielson has filed for the trademark for the yes. And we don't know if this is going to be a new movement that he's bringing to AEW. We know that WWE previously had the trademark, which prevented Bryan Danielson from using that in AEW. But obviously, this isn't a coincidence with All In happening at Wembley Stadium. Obviously, we have the match between Bryan Danielson and Swerve Strickland. And look, obviously it's not time for predictions just yet, but I'm going to throw this out there. If you're doing the trademark, Bryan Danielson remains a part-time wrestler in AEW. He's going to wrestle a little bit here and there. He's never won the world championship in AEW. It could be a possibility that Wembley Stadium ends with Bryan Danielson winning the world championship. And then obviously doing the yes chance with the celebration. And then of course I could see AEW launching new merchandise, because that would be the right thing to do if you're a business. Obviously you want to capitalize on it for many reasons, but yeah, I mean, I think that's simply the way it goes down. I don't think you would trademark this for any other reason. Look, I like Bryan Danielson. I'm a huge fan of Bryan Danielson. Who knows what the hell will happen? The wrestling world is crazy. I see people even speculating that maybe Bryan Danielson could leave AEW and go back to WWE and you know, maybe get inducted to the Hall of Fame or whatever it may be. Obviously, we know Tony Khan really wants Bryan Danielson to stay in the company, so that is something that we also have to factor in. I think Tony Khan will pay top money to retain Bryan Danielson if he hasn't already. And just a little tidbit that's interesting is that the doctors wouldn't even clear Bryan Danielson until Wembley Stadium, because they are trying to make sure that he is 100% healthy before this potential match. There seems to be some sort of verbal agreement in place for Bryan Danielson to work after Wembley Stadium, but technically speaking, he hasn't signed a new deal just yet, and that's completely fine. I personally think he'll end up staying in AEW. I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, how does AEW go about it? I don't know, but I just like my idea. It's picture perfect. You know, the idea that Bryan Danielson wins the belt, the yes chance, confetti, Wembley Stadium. It would be a great moment. Guys, let's turn our attention to Daniel Garcia. You know, I thought this was interesting because you really just don't know how free agency is going to go. And I just want to preface everything by saying that this doesn't mean that Daniel Garcia is leaving, but obviously you just got to factor this in. So we saw Daniel Garcia get his ass beat on television, right? We all seen that. Daniel Garcia has clearly been written off TV. Ibu of Wrestle Purist, he mentions that Daniel Garcia is fine. However, the company is just protecting themselves while he hopefully dots his I's and crosses his T's. If he stays with AEW, he will be jumping into a feud with MJF. And if he leaves, then basically he was ricocheted. AEW reportedly does want him to stay and reportedly feels that he will stay, but they made the decision to write him off just in case if he does not. Bryan Alvarez and Dave Meltzer also confirmed Wrestle Purist report. Basically, you know, when they were asking around, there really hasn't been a thought that he's leaving the company, and that's completely fine. Look, I like Daniel Garcia. He's one of those guys where I feel like he's truly one of the four pillars of the company. I think there's much more potential with Daniel Garcia than there was with maybe Sammy Guevara, for example. Not trying to put the two against each other, but I just think when it comes to overall star power and overall presence and charisma and aura, Daniel Garcia, I feel like connects with the fans, not only because of his character, but also because of his wrestling ability. And, you know, I think Daniel Garcia is somebody that the company should be building around. I think they should be building a future with him involved. I fully expect him to stay in AEW, But then again, there were plenty of people I thought would stay in AEW or stay in WWE, and then they ended up leaving their respective companies. And that's what makes free agency fun. I feel like I say this all the time, but I feel like I need to keep saying it all the time. If somebody doesn't leave for another company, that's completely okay. And also, you got to look at AEW's potential with a guy like Daniel Garcia. Daniel Garcia goes into WWE. He might be going to NXT first. He might not be given the same amount of, preparation for a debut like Jade Cargill was, right? Like, you just have to be kind of realistic about the situation at hand. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that Daniel Garcia, even though he hasn't been over pushed in AEW, and maybe at times he hasn't even been pushed well at all, there is clearly more benefit for him to stay in AEW. But if he went to WWE, I would be very interested to see how he performs there. I just think it would be more of a lateral move, and that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's why free agency is fun. You literally just never know what's going to happen. Did you guys know that Goldberg was going to be in AEW, but he turned it down? Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. He did an interview with Chris Van Vliet, and they talked about his talks with AEW. He says, I just think we have different perspectives on it. It's hard for me to really pass judgment on their production because I don't watch it. I see clips of it, and it's hard to give a rational breakdown of how they are if I don't really watch it. So I don't really know. He reminds me of Dixie Carter, but a male version. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but he reminds me of that scenario, and it's just a different feeling. It's different. Okay, before we move on to the next comment, let's just kind of address this. He openly admits that he doesn't really watch all of AEW, so he can't really pass judgment on AEW because he doesn't really know how AEW produces their show. That's very valid. Goldberg's probably busy, probably doesn't have time to do that. That makes sense. Now, on whether or not he was close to actually coming to AEW, and basically he says, no, I don't think I was ever close to making a deal with him. I think it was much more of a realistic transition when Sting was involved. That's why I reached out to Sting, because I wanted to be part of it. I thought he and I could do a farewell thing at some point together, but it wasn't about me. It was about Sting, and I can never overshadow anything that he does, but I don't want to conquer the waters. It would have been a nice crescendo, but it wasn't about me, so the timing was kind of off. And that's what makes this really interesting. Clearly, there was talks of him coming into AEW. Clearly, those plans were canceled, and that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's actually really interesting that Goldberg has been linked to AEW so many times, but nothing has ever really come to fruition. And truth be told, I don't think it's ever going to come to fruition, but in wrestling, you literally never say never. And he is 100% correct in the sense of, in the sense of Sting and his retirement. It was not about Goldberg. It was about Sting. And instead of Goldberg, we got Ric Flair. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Ango Show.